We're going to talk about the role and responsibilities of facility staff with the decarbonization of, instead of saying the built environment, we want higher education, so campus, right? He just did a fantastic introduction for me. I'm Gerard Lee, right? Vice President Marx Okubo. So, all the things that he talked about, facilities condition assessment, owner rep, project management. We live the whole life cycle of facilities or buildings, right? From pre-development through design, construction, all right? And when architects and contractors are gone, we're still there, right? To help you with maintenance and all that kind of stuff, forensics, any kind of claims. And then if you ever, have to acquire a building or dispose of a off-campus building, we're there for you, okay? As you said, I have 31 years experience, 25 of that on the design side. I was actually the project architect of the first Living Building Challenge, Zero Net Energy public library in the nation, right? I was also the technical advisor on 3 Zero Net Energy carbon remodels for the city of San Diego. And I was the principal project architect for the first LEED certified Zero Net Energy Fine Arts building for Diablo Valley College. So I think I know a little bit about carbon from a very pragmatic standpoint. Okay, so today we're going to cover, high level, a little bit about the current trends in higher education right now. How it's going to apply to you. The tools that we can utilize. Discuss a little bit about carbon, right, and your role, right, and then kind of give you some examples and then wrap it up. Okay. Trends, the cliff. You've probably seen like about 1 billion photos of cliffs over the last couple of years, right? So at this point, we're looking at an additional reduction of college age, students, 400,000 between now and 2030, right? So that's a significant drop. Okay. Along with that, this is our world, right? We are seeing a reduction in operating budgets, right? About 3.4% drop since last year itself. Okay. We're also seeing a reduction, possible reduction from federal funding, definitely from state funding. I do hear that Florida has seen an increase, so that's pretty good, right? And what's our favorite word right now? Tariffs, right? So increasing costs, possible tariffs, great pressure to be under, right, when you're under higher education. So we're going to walk you through all of those issues. So if you got enrollment and it's dropping, what does that mean, right? It really means that, all those years of building and growth that we've experienced is kind of coming to an end. We're seeing a drop-off now in remodels, all right, and modernization of buildings. It doesn't apply all across the board. Some campuses obviously still see a higher rate of applicants compared to the seats that you have. But for, I would say, 75% of the rest of the colleges, you're seeing that impact, okay? So in that case, when you talk about carbon, your governing board and your campus leadership is probably looking at you and rolling their eyes, right? It's not high in their priority. So we're going to shift the conversation a little bit and give you the tools so that when you talk to them, you can make it a higher priority. Okay, so how do we do that, right? To look forward, you kind of need to have a strategic plan, right? You need a way to plan for the future. I'm not talking about your master plans, right? And to be able to plan strategically, you need data, okay? So one of the things, the 3 things that I'm showing out here are some of the tools that you can use. And they're not tools that you're unfamiliar with. The tools that, for the most part, you have used, but I'm going to couch it in a different way. Use these tools together, right? For the last few years, if you look at your master plans, what are they doing? It's all about growth, right? You bring in architects and planners, and when they do the master plan, well, they want all the projects so that they can work on them, right? So all your master plans are showing growth, okay? But we aren't in the growth environment right now, okay? We're in dropping enrollment. So their agenda doesn't meet your reality. So your reality, you get that by the information and the data that you can derive from doing facility condition assessments, right? Okay. I know some of you guys are on, say, like an 18-month, in refreshing your facility condition assessments. some on a 3-year, right? If you have a 3-year plan, some on a 5-year. Some of you guys is like facilities condition assessments, right? I mean, you haven't done one, okay? A campus-wide energy audit. Some of you guys have done energy audits on single buildings, right? Maybe a couple of buildings. Some universities have done them throughout the campus, okay? But it's pretty rare. I'm saying that it's actually a pretty good tool for you guys to use, right? And then your academic space utilization studies, okay? A lot of you guys do that. You do that on a regular basis. But what we want to do is take all of these things, combine them together. And what do I mean by that, right? Oh, before we do that, you can see I was really optimistic about having a huge room of people, okay? Okay, so we're going to do a poll, right? So how many of you are utilizing, campus-wide facilities condition assessments to develop your capital expenditure schedules, right? So we'll do this by show of hands. I think it's going to be really quick. A, you have completed your FCA, say, within the last 3 to 5 years. So 3 you guys. So I'm going to write this down. Okay. The poll will be more impressive if you had the full room. But we can live with this, right? Okay. So you're currently conducting an FCA. How many of you guys? 1. Okay. We are researching the need for an FCA. How many? No hands. Okay. We are about to issue an RFQ and RFP to procure your FCA services. Anybody? Show of hands. 1. Okay. E. None of the above. Nothing to see here. Let's just move it on, right? Okay, so considering the audience, right? Even if it's a bigger audience, in previous polls, we show about half or a little bit more than half who are doing FCAs, right? And then the rest of them kind of thinking about it or just not doing it at all because it's not required either by your lender or your governing structure, right? What we're going to show is that you should strongly consider doing it, okay? So what does carbon have to do with this, okay? And how does your role play into this? Well, carbon is almost everything that we all do on a day-by-day basis. Just for the fact that we're in facilities, right? Buildings are about 40%, for carbon emissions globally, right? So almost everything that you guys do impacts carbon, right? So anything you can do to reduce it in your daily operations is a good thing, right? But that word carbon is kind of loaded, right? Okay. Like I said, we live with this every day, okay? Utilities, energy costs, it's significant for operations, okay? Anywhere between 4 to 10% of operations, right? For higher education, depending on the source, right? Annually, the higher education sector spends between 4 bill to 9 bill. So that's billions, right? That's not chump change, okay? On a campus basis, depending on the size of your campus, it runs anywhere from over $1 million to 20, 30 mil, depending on the type of programs that you have and the type of buildings that you have on campus and the number of buildings. So again, not chump change, right? An average, say, 50,000 square foot academic building, the bill just for that one building is 100,000 at least, okay? In some states like where I'm from, right, it's even more because, they can take advantage, right? So your utility and the bills aren't your friend. Okay? They're not helping you. Okay? So, so one of the other things that I wanted to say about this is that, when we talk about carbon, let's change the language, right? Let's change it to the language that your leadership, your campus leadership can buy into, okay? We switch it to energy because energy equals carbon, if you think about it, right? It's all the emissions created when you generate energy and when you utilize energy. So do away with the fancy words, right? The fancy words actually get in the way. When I did the first zero net energy building back in 2013, right? That word was loaded, zero net energy, right? The cost estimator doing the project, assume it was so they projected $2 million over the owner's budget. So everyone was freaking out. I came by and said, hey, don't use that word, right? You can use it after the building's finished. Remove it, take it off all the drawings because everything is standard component. We bid the project, $1 million under budget. Okay. Zero net energy. This is back in 2012, 2013, before people were doing any of this kind of stuff, right? So we built the project under budget and it's paid for itself. So that's the one thing. Anything you do with energy, there is a return on investment. It pays for itself. It doesn't matter whether it's 4 years, 8 years, 10 years, 30 years. It pays for itself. Nothing else you do in your buildings is ever going to do that. So you can put the fanciest curtain wall on your building, the nicest, made in Germany siding, right? It looks nice. Okay, you feel good. It doesn't pay for itself. You do some energy conservation measures. Guess what? It pays for itself. Energy pays for itself. Nothing else you do will ever do that. So when you have that conversation with your leadership, and you can actually tell them that what we're going to do is going to pay for itself, it changes that conversation immediately. And it changes the way they look at you and how they're going to fund your projects. Okay, let's move on. So, as I was saying, this is the way we normally visualize our building. So this is photo. I just grab it, as example. This is FSU, right? The campus overhead view. And this is the way we all look at or experience buildings, right? Physically, right? Emotionally, psychologically, right? You walk into a light-filled space in the building, you feel good. You walk into a dank space and it's hot or too cold, you feel miserable, right? The spaces you create, right? They're visceral, right? And how you experience them is how successful you're going to be as a student, right? Or academic in the building, or even as you guys as facilities, right? Okay. But now let's look at the buildings in a different way. You got your typical garage structure. It looks like you have some student housing, some administrative buildings, some academic buildings, some labs, right? Almost everything that you have on your campus, right? Say we do an FCA. Now I'm not looking at the buildings as buildings anymore. I'm looking at them as numbers, right? I don't know whether or not I can use the laser on this. Okay, doesn't show on the screen. So you saw your parking garage before, right? So normally when you do your FCA, your CapEx, the CapEx study is done over a term. And the term can be 10 years, 15 years, 20 years, right? Once you get further out, the information isn't that useful. But so this is telling me, say, I'm going to spend $210 on my parking garage over 10 years. And why is that? Well, parking garages don't usually have a lot of costs. You're restriping maybe every 3 to 5 years. Okay, you may be doing some crack repair. Okay, if you have traffic coatings in your garage, and most don't, right? You're probably patching that, repairing that every 7 years or so, changing some, lighting, and maybe a few fans for environmental air. Not a huge cost, right? And if you're charging for parking, you probably know that parking garages are probably one of your more profitable structures in your campus. Okay. That little building down there, I don't know whether you guys can see it, right, on the screen. You can come forward if you want. I don't buy it. But yeah, that small dinky little building down there is your highest cost. 8.8 mil, almost 9 mil over 10 years. You're probably going, what the hell? Well, why is that costing that much? Well, it could be many reasons. It could be historical, right? It could be an older building. It could be one of those buildings where you're kicking the can down the road, right? And now it's come home to roost, right? You're waiting, okay, we'll fix that next year. You all know how that goes, right? You don't have the budgets, right? Let's fix it next year. Well, guess what? 20 years goes by, now everything's end of life, right? So it's huge cost. You start looking at that small building in a way different way, right? Okay. Per square foot, the cost to maintain a building now is astronomical, right? You got another building here on the far end here, and it's only $500,000, right? That's also now telling you a different story. So why is it only $500,000? And that building's almost $9 million. Well, it could be a new building. You could have just recently built it. So if you just built it, almost everything down there, other than sealants and paint, right? you're not going to be touching that for another 20, 25 years. So it's not going to show up for 2 terms, right, as a problem. So you got it going on that building, right? So you can see how just by layering the numbers in your buildings, you start to see your buildings in a very different way. And SCA is a really good tool, right? Too often we do that, we put it away in the filing cabinet. I want to show you guys how to use FCAs in a much different way. Now, let's say you actually did an energy utilization study, right? In your EUI, okay? Those buildings now look very different. So the lower in blue, less energy, right? Green, you're about average, doing well. Yellow, yeah, you're kind of getting up there. Orange, you're probably using more than standard. Red, those are your energy hogs. That's burning up, that's the majority of your 1 mil, 20 mil, 30 mil of utilities costs right there, okay? Parking garage is low. Why? What do you have going on there? Just your lighting, right? And maybe environmental air that kicks in once a day or so, okay? The other building there, there was $500,000 in maintenance costs, right? It's 45. It's doing good because maybe one of the reasons why the maintenance cost, your capex is low on it is because you did some refurbishing or because it's brand new. It's not going to be a big energy suck. Everything is all energy efficient, right? That little building, this little guy, that was a headache just now, is now an even bigger headache. 600, right? KBTUs per square feet per year, right? You got 2 other energy hogs, one at 400, one at 650. When you look at that, that's also telling you something. What's the potential use of that building? Which buildings use the highest energy on campus? It's your labs, right? Your wet labs, right? Even some of your dry labs, okay? If you have a medical center or a hospital on campus, right? Those run about, between 400 to 600, sometimes more, right? Depending on the size. Those are your energy hogs. Some cases, you can't do anything about it because that's just the way it is. But there are ways that you can actually save energy with labs, okay? This paints a very different picture than the first image, right? Or even the second image, okay? The data that you get is really, really useful because now it starts to tell you which buildings are the ones you should prioritize and which buildings that you can just put off for a while, buy yourself some time. Okay, you put on your space utilization. Normally we do that, right? And you take it and it goes to a master plan. And master plans, I always say, always look very optimistic, right? But when you put it with your FCA and your energy bills, right? You start to see buildings very differently, okay? This building that maybe at one point you're looking, hey, that's it, 9 mil. That's energy hog. Maybe I should reconsider using the building. Now, all of a sudden, I see I got 105, utilization in it. So if you see all the studies, right, most academic buildings run about 20%, actually, right? Everybody wants to have a building for their major, humanities, English, math. I want a building. But you only have 20% utilization, right? You're doing good if you get 40%, right? Labs are different. Labs have 90% utilization, okay? So that's really telling me that's a lab building, available utilization, okay? So it means that I don't have capacity. So I got a crappy building, excuse my French, right? It's energy hog, and I actually need more of it, okay? And I look at the other buildings in red, and they're telling me something similar. I look at all my other buildings, right? And I'm seeing 65, 54, right? Parking garage, it doesn't apply because it's not housing people, it's cars. But if you were to look at it from the standpoint of car utilization, that's probably 250%. You never have enough parking, right? So that's your retirement plan. Buy some cheap land next to your campus, build a parking garage, it's low maintenance, right? And then you charge them a ton of money, right? Then we all can retire happily. I joke, but yeah. So this building's in red. What do you do? So now that's all drawing your attention, right? Now you're seeing your campus in a very different way. If you to tear down a building, you probably should be building something new to replace it and to accommodate the capacity ahead of time, right? Or the other way to look at it is, I'm already spending 9 mil on this building. I got, a parking lot here. Maybe I can expand the building and use some of your future funding, right, for the new building, combine it with your CapEx, right? Get a new building, revitalize the old building, make it more energy efficient, and all of a sudden, all of this starts to drop, right? So you couldn't do that without the data. But when you look at it this way, and you apply your facilities condition assessment and your energy utilization and your space analysis, you now actually have the data, one, to be able to argue for what you need, right? And two, you now know how to allocate the limited funding that you may have, right? As we all saw, it's getting less. You're not getting more, right? So you need to be able to do more with the less that you have, okay? So, that's the argument that I'm trying to make. Utilize these tools. They don't cost all that much when you look at it from professional fee, standards, but they give you so much information that you can plan better over the 10, 15, 20 years. Because we all know when it comes to maintaining buildings, how do we normally do it? We react. Something has to fail, then we deal with it. But if we use this, ahead of time when it's going to fail. You can plan for it, so you're not reacting. And if you plan for it, you keep your costs down. Because if you're reacting, it's an emergency, the contractors know that, right? So strategy versus implementation. How do we apply this? Okay. Facilities condition assessments. Like I said, you develop your CapEx, right, over 10, 15, 20 years. Okay. When it gets out anywhere beyond 15 years, it's kind of useless information. It's too far out. You can't use that info, right? But I don't know why people still do that. Keep it within that 10, maybe at most 15 year. I know some of your governing structures require further out, but talk to them about it, right? You don't need that information and it doesn't work. And then if you're not doing this, as required by your lender or your governing structure, right? And you're doing it, say, instead of an 18-month cycle or a year, right? 3 to 5 years, whatever. The maximum you should go without refreshing, I would say, is 3, right? Look at what happens within a year, within this last year, right? Last year, when I was talking to everybody, everyone was positive. They said, oh, it's going to be a good year, right? This year, everyone's like, holy, terrorists, right? So one day it's 10%, next day it's 15%. Now we're talking 245%. I think we all know which country we're talking about, right? Some of the good things is that because of COVID, when we couldn't get stuff from, Europe or China, a lot of stuff was onshore. So we're actually getting a lot of stuff from local, regional manufacturers and Canada and Mexico. They still have tariffs, but it's not 245%, right? So it's not all bad news and it's not worked out yet, right? So a lot of people are panicking and I'm like, calm down, right? Nothing's finalized yet, right? We don't know how they're going to, there's no country that doesn't want to do business with America, right? So at some point, they're going to come to the table. So I tell people, don't panic yet, right? But you should at least account for anywhere between 10 and 20% because that at the very least is going to stay. Okay. So when you have this, as I say, you don't know when your equipment is going to die, when it needs to be replaced. You actually have a plan that you probably didn't have before, okay? This is what a typical CapEx schedule kind of look like, right? You have your item. It could be building envelope related, okay? It could be mechanically related, okay? In this case, this element here is telling me that it's a roof. And it's been on the building for a good long time. You guys haven't done any maintenance or even any patching. Its end of life is 2027. It's going to cost you $400,000 to replace it, okay? You look down here, and that's the chiller that's sitting on the same roof, right? And it needs to be replaced 5 years out, right? 2032. Okay. Normally you look at that and say, okay, I know how to plan for that if you're using it that way. And it's a good thing. It's better than reacting, right? Now you're proactive. Okay. Now I say the FCA isn't just something you look at and you budget accordingly. Yes, you should. At the very minimum, that's what you should be doing. But now I say it's a tool. You can use it to plan strategically, and you can use it to reduce your costs. I have two elements here that I have to deal with within 5 years of each other. Your total cost, $650,000. Now, what happens if I was to do this? Let's say, hey, I think I can eke out a little bit more life from my roof. Let's put a little coating down there. I can get maybe 2-3 years out of it, right? From 2027, I could push it out to 2030. Okay? That buys me time. I can get a little bit more funding. Okay? Yeah, the cost could go up 3% every year. It could go up more depending on inflation, right? But it's a risk I'm willing to take for one reason. The chiller in a life is 5 years out. But we all know chillers at that point, super energy inefficient, right? It's going to give you troubles the last few years. You're probably, calling the repair guy in. You're no longer warranty, not when you're in a life, right? So it's more expensive to fix and to maintain. Let's say now you bring this back 2 years together into 2030. You have a $650,000 job now, okay? But that's a different contractor. You're working with a general contractor. So he's going to build it up to 2 different subs, right? You're only dealing with one person. Here, I had to deal with 2 different contractors, 5 years apart. And you all know what happens when you put in a brand new roof and you do something 5 years later? You tear up your roof, right? You screw up your warranty, okay? Now there's a leak. You go to your contractor, say, hey, it's leaking. He says, oh, well, you put in that chiller. Not my problem. You do it this way, all one job. You're not tearing up your roof. Your roof is in good condition because you put in the chiller at the same time, right? So it's all coordinated, okay? You're only shutting down your building how many times now? Instead of doing it twice, once, okay? You don't have to deal with traffic disruption or traffic control twice in 5 years. You're doing it once, okay? You're dealing with peer review or the building department or whoever your local authority is, right? Once. You're dealing with your design and contractor once, not twice. Now, say you combine this with your capital improvements, right? Not your maintenance. Say you wanted to put photovoltaics into your building. There was a plan, right? And maybe it was occurring somewhere here. Well, guess what? Do it all at the same time. Look at both new as well as existing. Do your PV at the same time. Now you're really not tearing up your roof. And now you got a really decent job that when you bid it, I bet with you, the total cost will be lower than $650,000 because it's a bigger job. You got better contractors able to do a bigger job, and they want the job, they probably bid it lower. Okay, I know what you're thinking about change orders and that kind of stuff. That's a different story. We want to start out with a lower number.
What I think is with one thing in this situation, right? You might not really have a choice. And that roof needs to be replaced, right? And you need to put that AC unit on there. You will never pass it. They will never let you put that AC unit on top of that roof if that roof is in that condition.
Exactly, right? So that's what you plan, right? If this roof was occurring out here, you bring it in to align. You see what I mean? But you can't do that without the data.
Right.
If you have the data, now you can plan, right? So it doesn't matter whether the roof was before or after you align them, right? So now the FCA is a different kind of tool that you probably weren't thinking about before, right? Energy efficiency. Remember I was saying, if you want this to work, don't say the word carbon. Don't use any of the fancy language that your architects are using. Architects love to use fancy language, right? I'm an architect. God's sake, I used to do this on that side, right? Zero net energy, carbon neutral, all that kind of stuff. Well, that works on their part, right? And it works to kind of sell you an idea. You take that back to your leadership and they look at you and you're, what? Right? What are you spending all that money for? Okay? Because they see that and they start dropping the dollar signs on it because to them, it's expensive, right? cut all that out. Don't let anyone talk about it. You can talk about it after you're successful. Then you can say, hey, we're carbon neutral. Hey, we're zero net energy, right? Do that after you're successful. When you need that money, don't use that language at all. Like I said, carbon equals energy. There's nothing you do on your building that's going to get you a return on investment except stuff that you do related to energy. Okay, ASU, right, Arizona State University, they have a 24.2 megabyte photovoltaic on site. They've been carbon neutral since 2019. They can talk about being carbon neutral now, right? Because 2019 is 6 years ago. They've saved millions of dollars in energy costs. Same with University of Georgia, right? They have photovoltaics on campus. They have a steam and chiller central plant. Many of you guys have that too, right? They reduce their overall energy efficiency by 22%, right? Again, 22% out of $1 million, right? That's $220,000 back for you, right? That $220 savings will pay off whatever you invested into the system. Pennsylvania State, right? Their photovoltaic supply a quarter of the campus energy. Their 2019 savings was 2.5 mil. They're projecting savings of 14 mil all the way up to 2045. That's not chump change. Okay, you could be king on your campus because everybody else wants money. You're telling them, yeah, I want money, but I'm going to give it back to you. That's a really huge story that you're telling. Okay, Princeton, right? They have a geothermal plant, right? 850 bores into the ground, okay, for the heating and cooling, right? So the geothermal does both, heating and cooling. They're going to achieve zero emissions by 2046, okay? Do you know what's so special about the year 2046? Why are they saying 2046? People like to say 2045, right? 2050, 2046, because that's the 300-year anniversary. I bet with you that even if they achieve it before or after, they're still going to say they hit it by 2046, right? Because it's good PR, okay? University of California, right? They have 10 campuses. They have installed 55 megawatts of PV, right? Across all 10 campuses. They have a clean energy central plant for UC Berkeley, and they have the first all-electric medical center for UC Irvine. So just think about that. Medical centers are your highest energy users right, for utilities, both gas and electric. And they just did the first all-electric because as they build up the photovoltaic, right, they're not buying that from the utilities anymore. They're reducing the cost, right? So their savings is in the millions of dollars too, okay? Say you don't want to go that big, right? Say you don't have the funding. Well, there's ways you can save, okay? It's not going to be huge savings, but it's still savings, right? Even a 10% savings, right, on $1 million bill is $100,000. You can recommission your air handler units. You can recommission your steam and chiller units, right? Those will normally get you like, say, a 10, 15% savings, right? Just by recommissioning them. And also a lot of your buildings, the way they went in right after the design is probably the way they've been operating ever since. But guess what? Did your program change? Did your use of the building change? It has, right? So you're probably expending more energy on your building than you should be. Because one, especially if you don't have the same utilization that you initially thought, right? So re-looking at your buildings can save you money without having to spend a lot of money. You don't have to invest that much, right? I had a client, they reassessed the original steam pressure design, right? They were at 12 PSI, they reduced it to 6 PSI, and they saw immediately that same year 10% savings in energy, right? So you don't have to do big things. You can do some small things and start to see savings already, okay? Remember we talked about labs? They're your energy hogs, right? What's your biggest energy hog in the lab? Your fume hoods, right? They're running 24/7 all the time because you have to, especially if you have corrosive chemicals in them, right? They're your biggest energy hog. And one of the reasons why is that what do all the students and professors do when they work with a fume hood? Leave the sash, maximum opening, it's sucking the life out of your face and throwing it out exhaust, right? So there are things called mesh. So motion activated sash alarms. It's just an alarm. You still need somebody to manually bring the sash down, right? But at least it's alarm. So if they leave it wide open, and say facilities is walking through, no classes going on, you hear the alarm, you know, okay, someone left it. You can walk in there, bring it down, right? And, you know, it's doing what it needs to do, and you just reduce your energy. The other ways you can do that too, with your existing equipment. So a number of years ago, Genentech, right, life sciences, big pharma, right, they did a little experiment. They tied all the fume hoods to the BMS, building management system, which they then installed anemometers, right, those that measure wind on the roofs, okay? And they're on the windy side, and they have wind throughout most of the year. So when the wind speeds reach a certain speed, it tells the BMS, and the BMS signals to the fume hood to spin down the fan, right? And on the exhaust, instead of having your normal caps, right, they had those specially designed, have you seen them? The vanes, they have a fin, and when the wind's blowing, they change direction. So they were using the wind to exhaust the fume hoods. Their energy savings, $600,000. Do you know how much money they spent to do that? 1.2 mil. They paid it off in 2 years. That was their return on investment, 2 years, right? That's pretty damn short, right? And they've been saving money ever since. You can do small stuff with a very fast return and get the savings that you want. That's a win, right? That's a win for you, okay? Say you have a state utility or state government, if you're getting state funding. I know those are private, you don't have that option, but there are some grants that you can apply for, right? Especially from the utilities, where for like, how am I running on time? Okay, Las Positas and community college, they already had a 2 megawatt photovoltaic system on campus. They did that to cut off their peak energy, because in some states, your energy bill is based on your maximum usage. So say you may use a ton of power for 1 second on one day in the entire year in summer. And guess what the energy bill is going to be based on? That peak, that 1 second of use, right? That's how they get you, right? So they put in photovoltaics, because photovoltaics are generating power during the time when you're most going to use the energy. So they could do what they call peak shaving. They shave off the peak, and they immediately drop the energy bills, right, by a good 20%, just by doing that, right? It paid for itself. And so then what they did was they installed a microgrid. So just as we were talking this morning, right, they have a thermal storage as well as a battery electric storage system. Okay, the investment overall 2 mil, 1.5 mil was from the state. They had to match $500,000. Guess what the payoff was? The payback, 4 years. What can you can't say that about anything else you put in your building, right? After 4 years, all of that is free, right? It's money in your pocket, okay? You can't say that about anything else. So don't talk about carbon, talk about energy, because energy, you get money back. It works so well, they're doing it on the second campus, Chabot College, right? Because it just makes sense for them, okay? It can make sense for you too. Technical College System of Georgia, right? We did FCAs and energy utilization studies on 400 buildings, millions of square feet, right? This is what the data look like, right? So this is the current state, right? And with the information, because they did building by building, they could then implement building by building ECM, energy conservation measures, right? So they were seeing anywhere between 10 to 15%, right? Okay, just by doing a study, right? And then doing what I was talking about, not having to do heavy investment, they're getting 10 to 15% savings. And then over the years, it's been tens of millions of dollars, right? And that was a while ago. If they were to do a new study and implement newer technology, they'd probably get even more savings. So it's something that you can do, right, every few years to keep on tightening up your energy savings. And then at some point, you max it out, and then you're going to have to do something bigger like a microgrid or whatever, or photovoltaics or whatever, right? All of these are tools. You kind of need tools like this, right? Energy, space utilization, okay? California State University, this is public information. You can actually go pull this up. They have 23 campuses statewide, and they did utilization studies for all 23 campuses. What you're seeing here are the data for 2 campuses. So on the right-hand side in blue, right, is for San Francisco State. On the left, in that kind of pinkish, salmonish color, is Cal Poly San Luis Obispo. Okay, learn by doing. Okay, I went to Cal Poly. Okay, so tech school, right? You learn by doing. That's why I can talk technical stuff here. Okay, San Francisco, dense, heavily urban, big population. San Luis Obispo, Central California, coastal, remote, right? It's equal distance between San Francisco and LA, the 2 big urban centers. It's not an urban center. Can you tell me which one has higher utilization? Heavy population or lower population? How many? Give me a show of hands. How many for San Francisco? 1. How many for San Luis Obispo? Okay, fine. You can all kind of know where I'm going with this anyway, so, right? So yeah, heavier utilization, only 42%, including their labs. San Luis Obispo, their classrooms are 92%. This is just regular classrooms. Their labs, 105, right? And that's in the middle of nowhere. But it's a technical school, so program does matter, right? Every year, they have more applicants than there are seats. They are impacted program, right? So when you look at that, if you've been watching the news, especially for me, because this is what, these are my clients actually, San Francisco State with Sonoma State, it's, a few more miles out, and then Cal State East Bay, which is across the bay, right, are combining operations and services. So they're going to make some stuff redundant, right? They're going to tighten up operations, right? They're going to close down some of the programs. Okay, so they're losing athletics in one of the campuses, PE, some of the smaller programs are getting shut down. Okay. San Luis Obispo, they have a shortfall of 9,000 beds. Right now, they have a $1 billion program building student housing that's going to supply them 1,200 beds, right? They still have a shortfall. They see they are projecting growth. I say it's not equal across campuses, but these studies can inform you, because guess what? If you remove buildings from your assets, right, your inventory, you're not operating them, you're not wasting energy. But you wouldn't know how to do that unless you had this information, right? Now, when your humanity says, I need a brand new building, you can tell them, you're 20% utilized. I'm going to combine you with math. Right? Then you get better utilization, but you can't do that without the data. Okay. So, to round it all up, right? Facility condition assessments, your energy utilization studies, and your space utilization studies, look at them in a different way. Don't look at them as individual tools. They're powerful as individual tools, but when you combine them together, you're now able to plan strategically in a way you couldn't before. You can actually really leverage your available funds, right? You're not getting more, so you need to make it work for you, right? And with that, I'm done, and I think I'm under the wire, right?
Got it.